Welcome to On Record PR, where we dive deep into the strategies and tactics that matter most to law firm leaders. It is Monday, March 10th, 2025. I am Jennifer Simpson Carr, and today I am joined by my incredible colleague, Elizabeth Ogilvie. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning, Jennifer.
So, for listeners, this is the first time, well, or viewers, listeners or viewers, the first time that they are hearing or seeing you. And I think important context for today's conversation is that Elizabeth is really our agency's resident kind of HR expert guru. And she is a SHRM certified professional, but also has years of experience having worked in HR in-house for a law firm. And then also for our agency on the communication side, really bringing that HR hat and lens into all of the communications and kind of risk management, reputation management work that we do. So Elizabeth was a practicing attorney, then an in-house HR and communications professional for on the law firm side, and now is with the agency. And it's important to note that while she remains a licensed attorney, our conversation today is not legal advice. It is purely from a reputation management and crisis communications perspective. So with that out of the way, we can dive into a conversation today, which is the fact that DE&I programs are now officially under attack in a more meaningful way, I think, than they had been prior to even last Friday. So for those of us in the legal profession, the legal industry, two executive orders have come out naming specific law firms, and the latest specifically targeting DE&I programs for large firms and influential firms. So Elizabeth and I are really going to talk today about what that means and what law firms should be considering kind of under these uncharted waters, really. So, Elizabeth, first let's clarify what executive orders are, because I know the feeling in the legal industry and
Yes.
outside in the general world is that, the law is being rewritten overnight. So let's talk a minute about what do executive orders actually do?
So executive orders are not legislative policy. They don't supersede, erase, or eliminate any federal laws, right? So Title VII is still in effect. Your EEOC language on your website is still legal and you should leave it there. There's a lot of things that these executive orders do not impact. Bostock is still in effect. It doesn't impact affirmative action for disability and veteran status right now. So a lot of these executive orders have had a lot of uncomfortable impact, but they haven't impacted employment law.
So basically what I'm hearing is that executive orders haven't overtaken other rules of law that are currently in place, but what they are doing is giving us in the legal community a pretty big warning sign of how the administration and the DOJ are approaching their enforcement of potentially certain programs.
Yes. And what I would say is if your DEI program, diversity and whatever you call it at your firm, if it was legal before January 20th, it's still legal. The executive orders have not changed that. And I think that's important to just take a deep breath and understand that.
Yeah, so what's happening now is firms are coming to us or their strategic partners and saying, you know, we need to engage you for managing and kind of communicating what's happening around our DE&I programs. Where do we start? And so I just want to ask you, what is the position, the starting line that we are taking when our clients and new firms are coming to us asking for this conversation?
Great question. So the first thing we advise is to conduct a risk assessment. You need to understand what your risk tolerance is in this environment. And before I get into that, I'd encourage anybody who has not, please go read the ABA's statement that it released. I concur with what the ABA has said. I strongly support it. That said, the first thing you need to do is figure out who you are as an organization, right? Who are your stakeholders? Are your current HR programs, including diversity initiatives, in line with their objectives? Are you staying true to your vision and your values with your DEI programs or your diversity programs? And that is a good starting point to figure out how and if you want to change your programs.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think the initial reactions that we heard, and I think that many of us felt really varied. We engaged in conversations where a lot of questions emerged, like what puts our firm at risk? Should we scale back? Should we wait until we have more clarity? How do we maintain our commitment to diversity while managing the legal risks that are potentially involved here? So let's talk about how firms can assess their current DE&I initiatives to identify areas that may draw scrutiny or under, legal challenges under these investigations.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is I think a knee-jerk reaction is just take everything off your website that says diversity on it. And that is a mistake. And on the top line, I just want to mention, as I mentioned earlier about employment laws still in effect, you could be subjecting yourself to traditional employment discrimination claims if you just remove everything from your website, including your standard EEOC language about hiring practices. So please don't do those things. Like I said, this is the time to take a deep breath and kind of do a holistic analysis of all your programs. You should know every single one of your diversity or inclusion programs. You should know how they intersect. Who are the leaders? Who are the people in your law firm that are affected by them? Right? That is a good starting point, because what we have learned from the federal district court in Maryland is that for the merit-based EO, which the full name escapes me right now, the court found that it's violative of the First Amendment, what they're asking of private companies. But what they also found was that it was okay to investigate all of these programs and for Pam Bondi in the USAG's office to develop an investigative program. So those are the things we need to be focused on, right? So when we start at the top and understand all of our programs, where they touch, who they impact, then we can have a better idea of where you need to start with your own internal analysis.
So something I've learned from this agency and really kind of lives with me every day is that we talk about how in crisis there are opportunities. And
Yes.
so we're going to pause here for a message from our sponsor. And when we get back, I'd like to chat about some of the opportunities that we've identified where firms can potentially take that holistic view, as you said, Elizabeth, and potentially create opportunities from within.
Yes.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Rubel Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses worldwide. With an expert team positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by an international faculty, Furia Rubel enhances our clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation, protecting brand and reputation, and supporting internal marketing teams. To learn more, visit furiarubel.com.
So, Elizabeth, we're back from our sponsor message, and I want to pick up on opportunity and crisis and really ask you to provide an example of the way that a firm could potentially evaluate their DE&I or programs that fall under their DE&I efforts
Mm-hmm.
and the changes that might be available to create more opportunity at the firm.
Sure. So, anecdotally, I have read that a lot of firms, a lot of private companies, not law firms, are dropping their mentorship programs, specifically mentorship programs that support women in leadership. So I don't recommend taking those kinds of steps. A mentorship program is a perfect opportunity for you to go in and look at what you could change. A good example is making your mentorship programs skilled-based, meaning that you would have had to, for example, first chaired your first trial. You would have had to land your first client by yourself if the mentorship program was business development oriented. These are benchmarks that anyone can achieve that are not based on race. For example, you can open up your mentorship programs to women and men, and that makes it more equitable for everyone. I see no reason why we cannot strengthen these programs by making them even more inclusive. And by making them more inclusive, you're meeting these objectives and the intent of what is in these executive orders without compromising your values.
If I can kind of infer from something you just said, it sounds like opening these programs up more broadly only will benefit more of your great talent and opportunity if that is a direction your firm chooses to go.
Yes. And the other thing I counsel is that you need to be careful about keeping your top performers and making sure that your attorneys and staff still want to work for your law firm and that you're not driving people away by doing rash things like eliminating entire programs. Going back and making adjustments and making things more equitable for all makes a lot more sense and will help you retain those people.
Yeah, talent retention is such a big topic of conversation right now, and this obviously is something that impacts talent so substantially. Where firms stand on these things. I know that there have been headlines around talent wars and attracting and keeping great talent. So this is definitely a consideration in that regard. So let's kind of go back to a more macro level. In the first kind of 30 days that the president was in office, there were more than 70 executive orders signed, and three of those specifically targeted DE&I efforts in the language. So I want to give like a hypothetical. So a law firm calls us today and says, we're not really sure what to do, where to start. Do we assess everything that we are working on, everything that we've worked so hard and poured resources into, and start making changes? Or do we hit the pause button and wait day by day to see how things unfold? Where do we start with a firm who's coming to us for the first time and has these questions on a path forward?
Good question. So the first thing I would say, kind of bringing back in what I said at the top, if your programs were legal before January 20th, they're still legal. So that is the first place. Second, what is your risk tolerance?
Mm.
That has got to be the first question that you ask. If you are a high risk tolerance and you're okay with keeping your DEI programs and making subtle adjustments, then that is a good course of action for you. But I think you cannot make these decisions about changing major programs without figuring out where you are as a law firm, what your stakeholders expect, what your employees need, how can you support your staff and your attorneys the best.
Yeah, it sounds like it's time for a lot of listening
Yes.
and a lot of internal conversations about where we stand on things as a firm. So I know that we are still waiting to see how kind of collectively law firms will respond to what's transpired the past 2 weeks.
Mhm.
I know that we've all shared individual posts that people have come out very strongly in support of the ABA and of these two firms that were named. Are there companies that are kind of exemplar or have come out with a statement or a stance that we can point to?
Costco has done a beautiful job with this. And I do think we should put that quote in the show notes so that everyone can read. Jamie Dimon has also come out and said that JP Morgan is not going to change their diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I think that those are wonderful exemplars. You do not need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. These programs have been around for 20 years or more. And, I think objectively, when they are measured correctly, have shown they're better for the workforce in general, and they support your attorneys and your staff in important and meaningful ways.
Yeah, I think I think that's probably the key thing here is we had a podcast episode with Renee Branson, and we'll link to that here as well. And something she said that has stuck with me, particularly for underrepresented and marginalized groups, is that stability in the workplace is invaluable. And
Yes.
where firms stood yesterday on their positions, taking that stance today and strengthening that stance in the future only helps those individuals and those groups feel supported and help them through a time where the world is uncertain around them. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. I really valued the chance to coordinate with you on prepping for this podcast and then having the conversation today. It's been really helpful for me. And I want to thank our listeners. Thank you for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave a message on iTunes and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And we will see you next week.
On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Rubel Communications. This episode is edited by Isabel Horan and Christian Yamula. Visit www.onrecordpr.com for resources and more information.